I can't hear anything but gunshots. She was shot in the chest and that the blood was coming from her chest, not going down into her chest. When I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that, maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
On the tranquil evening of May 19, 1983, a scene of unimaginable terror unfolded at McKenzie-Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. Diane Downs, a 27-year-old mother, arrived there with her 3 children, having endured the horrifying ordeal of a deadly carjacking.
What is it? Somebody just shot my kids. There's blood everywhere.
The children, bloodied and shot, were fighting for their lives, while their mother was shot in the arm. As news of this horrifying incident spread like wildfire, a nation stood united in shock and sympathy for the unfortunate family. Yet as the shadows lifted, an unsettling truth began to emerge. Who could have targeted the helpless children and their mother? What were the fragments of truth that held the power to reshape their entire story? Welcome back to Mysterious Hook, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases across the country. Today we are looking at the case of Diane Downs. This is not a story for the faint of heart, for it is riddled with unimaginable horrors and unspeakable acts. But before we delve into the mystery, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe and like buttons. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the story. Springfield, Oregon is a charming town tucked away in the breathtaking landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. Just a stone's throw from Eugene, Springfield has carved out its own identity by becoming the beloved sister city that never quite outgrew its small-town charm. And here's an exciting tidbit. Legend has it that Springfield served as the inspiration for the iconic American town featured in The Simpsons. As you wander through the streets, you'll encounter the coolest murals splashed across various walls. Despite this colorful backdrop, the crime in Springfield today surpasses the national average. However, back in the 80s, the occurrence of violent crimes in this region was unheard of. Therefore, when a mother of her 3 children were attacked in this very place, people were left stunned. It still stands as one of the most unsettling tales to have ever unfolded within the city's borders. At approximately 10:48 p.m. on Thursday, May 19, 1983, 27-year-old Diane Downs arrived at the McKenzie-Willamette Hospital ER. The mother pointed towards her red Nissan sports car and screamed out loud, "Somebody shot my kids."
What is it? Somebody just shot my kids. There's blood everywhere.
8-year-old Christine and 3-year-old Danny were struggling to breathe as they lay in the back seat, gasping for air. Meanwhile, 7-year-old Cheryl was lying face down on the floorboard in front, nearly hidden beneath the dashboard, covered by a dark sweater. In a race against time, all 3 children were rushed to the emergency room. The mother, Diane, had a minor gunshot wound to her left forearm, which was wrapped in a towel. A surprisingly minor injury, considering the viciousness of the attack. Her children, however, were in critical condition. They had been shot multiple times at close range. Dr. Stephen Wilhite, one of the few board-certified thoracic surgeons in the hospital that night, rushed to the hospital after hearing about the tragic incident.
When I first walked into the ER, immediately they pointed me to Christy. When I looked at Christy, I thought she was dead. Her pupils were dilated. Her blood pressure was non-existent. She is so close to death, it's unbelievable.
Christy bore the brunt of 3 gunshot wounds, with 2 striking her left chest and 1 affecting her thumb. Due to immense blood loss, she had suffered a stroke. Danny had suffered a gunshot wound to his spine, resulting in paralysis. Although barely, both of them managed to hold on to life. Unfortunately, that was not the case for the other sibling, Cheryl, who had sustained 2 gunshot wounds to her back and was pronounced dead later that night. When news of Cheryl's death reached Diane, Her demeanor was calm, a little too calm. She did not even flinch after hearing that the other 2 children had survived after being grievously injured. Her sole inquiry was whether the bullet had missed Danny's heart. The lack of visible emotional response from Diane struck those around her as odd, to say the least.
I can only imagine the shock of everyone at the hospital.
It was difficult for them to fathom how a mother who had just lost one child and found the other 2 in critical condition could appear so seemingly detached and unaffected.
When I was finished taking care of Christy, then I sought out her mother, and to my complete surprise, Diane was non-emotional, not a tear in her eye. I've never seen a reaction like that at all.
However, the medical professionals attending to her wound speculated that Diane might be experiencing shock, a common response to such a distressing incident. Understanding the gravity of the situation, the hospital didn't waste any time in alerting the authorities. Around 11:15 p.m., 3 officers from the Lane County Sheriff's Office, Dick Tracy, Doug Welch, and Roy Pond, arrived at the hospital.
Got a phone call from dispatch, and I was told the mother and her children had been shot. When I got to the hospital, I was directed to interview the mother.
Once Diane's initial treatment was complete, she was seated for an interview with the detectives. They began the interview with an introduction and then moved on to ask Diane about the events that had transpired throughout the day, seeking her first-hand account.
This is Detective Tracy, Wayne County Sheriff's Office, and present in the room is Detective Welch, and did you say your name?
Elizabeth Dow.
When you got up and go that?
From the beginning of the
From the
day?
beginning of the day.
Oh, okay. I got up at 5:15, took a shower, fixed my face, got the kids up at 5:45, and they got ready and went to Grandma's house.
Diane proceeded to tell the investigators that she left the kids at her parents' house at around 6:15 a.m. before heading off to work at approximately 6:30 a.m. Christy and Cheryl attended school, while Diane's mother looked after Danny. After school ended, the girls joined their younger brother at their grandparents' home. Diane said she got off work at around 3:30 p.m. and went to her parents' house to pick up the kids. She returned to the rental duplex at 1352 Q Street with her children to have supper. But then there would be an unusual change in their otherwise ordinary routine. Diane had a friend named Heather Pollard, who resided outside of Springfield on Sunderman Road. She explained that Heather had previously expressed an interest in owning a horse to her. So when Diane had come across an article about horses available for adoption, she thought Heather might find it appealing. Since the Pollard family did not have a phone, Diane, accompanied by her children, decided to pay them a visit that night. They stayed at the Pollard property approximately 15 to 20 minutes, during which Diane engaged in conversation with Heather, while her kids had the opportunity to feed and interact with the horse on the farm.
We went out there. She already had a horse. She'd just gotten it a couple days earlier. Same day I found the newspaper article, as a matter of fact. And so we stayed and the kids fed the horse grass and pet the horse and stuff like that, and then we left.
Diane said they left around 9:15 p.m. On their way back home, Cheryl occupied the front passenger seat, with Danny sitting directly behind her in the back seat, and Christy seated next to him, behind the passenger seat. Instead of taking the direct route back home, impulsively Diane made a spur-of-the-moment decision to indulge in a bit of sightseeing, something she claimed both she and the children enjoyed doing.
Like I said, we like to just cruise around and see stuff. We're new to the area, and the kids love the scenery and the trees, and they like to watch the rapids and the water of the river and stuff like that. We just liked enjoying stuff like that.
However, after doing this for a while, she turned back toward Springfield, noticing all 3 children had fallen asleep. She was driving down Old Mohawk Road outside the city, and Duran Duran's Hungry Like a Wolf was playing on the stereo. Diane said she only drove for a short distance on that dark country road when she encountered a man in the middle of the road.
So I just took off down there and got down a little ways, and there was a guy standing in the road waving his arm. He was not like on the white line, but he was in the center of my lane. So I stopped and got out and asked him what was the problem. And because it looked like he needed something, he was frantic. And so he came over to where I was and he said, "I want your car." And I said, "You gotta be kidding. I mean, how many people really do that in real life? They don't."
Diane proceeded to tell the detectives that the man pushed her toward the back of the vehicle and then put his hand into the open car window. The next thing she heard was the loud popping sounds, which were directed towards Cheryl first, followed by Danny and finally Christy. He then turned to Diane and once again demanded the car. Diane further continued that she mustered up the courage to fight back, realizing that her children had been shot.
I mean, I had to do something, so I faked throwing the keys to distract him because he was a little bit bigger than me, not a whole lot, but a little bit. And I knew I couldn't beat him up in a fist fight, and he had a gun anyway. And I figured if I could distract him, if I could just draw his attention away, I could shove him and get the hell out of there. Well, as he was swinging around, when I threw the keys, he swung around and he shot a couple times, and one of them caught me in the arm. And it didn't even hurt. It felt like somebody had squeezed me, and that's all. It didn't even hurt. But I knew I'd probably been hit. And I shoved him, and I jumped in the car, and we took off. I put the key in the ignition and took off. And if he fired after me, I have no idea, because Chrissy was laying in the back seat just choking on her own blood.
After Diane managed to escape in her car, she noticed that her children were bleeding profusely. While Christy was choking on her own blood, Danny was moaning in pain, but Cheryl didn't make any noise the whole time. Diane said she drove as fast as she could, but her own gunshot wound was causing her pain. So at some point she tightly wrapped a towel from her wrist to her elbow to slow the flow of blood.
She says at that point she drove like a lunatic to the hospital.
Just like the hospital workers, the detectives couldn't help but notice Diane's seemingly detached demeanor throughout the interview.
Her demeanor was flat, not one tear, even though she knew that Cheryl had died.
Despite the gravity of the situation and the tragic events that had unfolded, she didn't display the expected emotional response. Instead, she remained composed, not shedding a tear and even laughing at certain points. While it is true that shock and grief can manifest differently in individuals, the detective sensed that something wasn't adding up. Diane even went on to say that she prayed for their deaths to spare them from the suffering.
I just kept saying, "God, do what's best. If they gotta die, let them die, but don't let them suffer."
There were more red flags. Who goes sightseeing in the dark with 3 young children in the car? Why would someone stop the car and interact with a suspicious individual on a deserted road? And which mother would prioritize tending to her own wound with a towel while her kids were bleeding to death?
She had taken the time to carefully wrap her left arm in a towel while she drove to the hospital.
Would you do that as a mother? I wouldn't put a towel on my arm. I'd put it on them as a tourniquet, rip it apart.
The hospital workers also shared some of the disturbing comments made by Diane upon her arrival at the hospital. She reportedly made remarks such as, "Boy, this has really spoiled my vacation," and "That really ruined my new car. I got blood all over the back of it." These comments were not only bizarre but also deeply troubling, making everyone question the credibility of her story.
And then she says, "That really ruined my new car. I got blood all over the back of it."
Despite this, the investigators wanted to give the benefit of the doubt to a grieving mother, so they did not yet rule out the possibility of an unknown perpetrator. Their attention shifted towards gathering more information about the perpetrator, whom Diane had described to them.
He was medium build, but pushing towards being a little bit heavy. He had darkish hair, but not black. It was like a brown, dark brown, whatever. His face was kind of stubbly. Not like a beard. Not like he had a beard, but like he hadn't shaved in a couple days or so. His hair was kind of shaggy looking, like it had been cut in a shag, but not brushed out properly. It was just a voice, no accents, no lisps. Nothing that would distinguish him outwardly from anybody else. He was wearing a t-shirt that was a light color, but it wasn't pure white.
The police swiftly issued an APB for the bushy-haired stranger, a term Diane had never used, but it summarized her description. Ironically, in law enforcement, the term bushy-haired stranger is used to refer to a person who does not exist and cannot be produced in a court of law. It serves as a cover-up alibi figure for the guilty party to falsely attribute their crimes to. Nonetheless, a composite sketch was made based on Diane's description and was widely circulated to the media.
They came up with a composite, and that was circulated on every news station.
Elizabeth Downs says a shaggy-haired stranger shot at her.
Cops are racking their brains to try to put this case together.
Unfortunately, no witnesses or individuals who had seen the alleged perpetrator or his vehicle came forward to provide significant leads or breakthroughs in the investigation. But as word went out about this horrific tragedy, residents of Springfield were left in a state of shock and fear. The idea that a violent and ruthless individual had targeted innocent children and their mother left people on edge.
Thursday night, a man flagged down a woman and her 3 children on the road from Marcola to Springfield. Friday, the manhunt began in earnest.
Initially, there was panic. People in Oregon were like, oh my God.
People were locking their doors and they were feeling very unsafe. Kids weren't allowed to go out by themselves.
Mothers didn't go out in the evening, and they sure didn't take their children.
Children were no longer allowed to venture out alone. Mothers in particular refrained from going out in the evening with their children. The safety and security of the people of Springfield became a paramount concern. Amidst the chaos, authorities continued their investigation. A comprehensive search of the entire area was conducted, which led to a significant discovery. Ejected casings from a spent .22 caliber firearm. The casings matched the bullet wounds inflicted on the members of the Downs family.
The only evidence we had were some casings that were found at the scene. We had divers in the river, but the gun was never found.
Investigators at this point didn't have a lot to go on. Though they had their suspicions about Diane, they basically did not have any evidence to establish her guilt. That was when they came up with an idea.
We asked Diane if she'd do a reenactment for us. We simply wanted to nail down her statements, and she was more than happy to do that.
For the most part, reenactments are not easy for the victims, especially when they have experienced the loss of their loved ones. It is expected that most people would be overwhelmed with emotion and may cry while reenacting the most terrible moments of their lives. However, it was Diane Downs whose reenactment video would forever be remembered as one of the most disturbing ones in history.
Sitting in the car is Elizabeth Diane Downs, one of the victims of this attempt murder.
I'm throwing the keys, okay? I'm throwing the keys.
Simulating.
Yeah, I go like that. I got in the car, jumped in, put the keys in. I just hit my cast. Started the car and left. The car door shut itself. God.
Alarmingly, not only was she seen giggling and joking, but she was even filmed fixing her makeup during the reenactment. It was enough to make the investigators' hair stand on end. Investigators knew that in order to understand this strange woman and piece together the case, they needed to delve deeper into her personal life. Elizabeth Diane Fredrickson, who went by her middle name, was born on August 7, 1955, in Phoenix, Arizona, to her parents Wesley Lyndon Fredrickson and Willa Dean Fredrickson. Diane would grow up in what appeared to be the typical American family of the 1950s and 1960s, with her 3 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. Although Diane excelled at her studies, she was not at all popular in school. In fact, throughout her education, she was picked on by the other children, mostly because she came from a family with strict conservative values, and her parents forbade her to wear fashionable clothes or makeup. In her early years, Diane was a shy child, but that changed when she reached the age of 14, and she developed a tendency to talk compulsively. Diane graduated from Moon Valley High School in Phoenix, where she encountered her high school sweetheart, Stephen Downs, when she was just 15 years old. Despite her parents' disapproval, Diane continued the relationship with Steve, who was just 7 months older than her. They stayed together for the remainder of high school, but their path diverged when Steve enlisted in the Navy in June 1972. After high school, Diane enrolled at Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College, located in Orange, California. However, her time at college was short-lived, as she was expelled after just 1 year due to alleged promiscuous behavior. Following her expulsion, Diane had no choice but to return to her parents' home in Arizona. Diane had a stifling atmosphere at home, as her parents constantly tried to clip her wings. Desperate to break free from the confines of her home life, she reconciled with Steve, eventually marrying him in November 1973. Diane was just 18 at the time. From the very beginning, their marriage was shaky at best. Additionally, the couple frequently fought over financial matters and accused each other of being unfaithful. Diane craved love and attention, only to discover Steve could not provide it. Diane found solace when she became pregnant, despite the ongoing problems in her marriage. Surprisingly, she didn't consult Stephen about getting pregnant. She just stopped using her birth control.
I got pregnant when I wasn't allowed to, and I'm not saying he forbade me to get pregnant, but I didn't consult him. I wanted to have children, and so I got pregnant without asking permission.
And she didn't regret the decision. Diane relished being pregnant, as it seemed to earn her the love and attention she had always desired. In October 1974, Diane gave birth to her first child, Christy. A pregnancy only lasted for a few months, and once it ended, Diane missed the attention she used to receive. So she once again stopped using birth control without informing her husband. As a result, Cheryl Lynn, their second child, was born in January 1976. But as much as she enjoyed being pregnant, she did not derive the same pleasure from actually raising her children. According to Steve Downs, Diane would frequently neglect her children.
Well, once she had the kids, it was another story, she treated them like crap. She really didn't treat them very good.
Their fights would sometimes lead her to take the kids and run away from Steve, but she always returned eventually. After Cheryl's birth, Steve made the decision that he didn't want any more children. He couldn't trust his wife with birth control, so he opted for a vasectomy. However, despite this procedure, Diane ended up getting pregnant again, but she chose to terminate the pregnancy. In 1978, the couple relocated to Mesa, Arizona. It was there that Diane engaged in multiple affairs with her coworkers. One such affair with one of her male friends, Mark Sager, resulted in becoming pregnant once again. This time she decided to carry the child to term, and in December 1979, Stephen Danny Daniel was born. A final attempt to salvage their marriage, Stephen accepted Danny as his own, even though he knew he wasn't the father. Yet less than a year later, they got divorced. The children stayed with their mother. When the marriage ended, Diane didn't have a stable job. In her attempt to support herself, she pursued becoming a surrogate mother, but faced setbacks. She failed 2 psychiatric exams, one of which indicated that she was psychotic. Rather than being concerned, Diane found this amusing and would boast about it to her friends. In 1981, Diane finally secured a full-time job as a postal carrier in Chandler, Arizona. During her working hours, she would send her children to stay with various family members. However, concerns were raised by neighbors about the well-being of the children when they were in their mother's care. According to the neighbors, the children would often be hungry and would beg for food. In cold weather, they would not be adequately dressed in coats or suitable shoes. It was reported that if Diane couldn't find a babysitter, she would leave her 6-year-old daughter, Christine, in charge of the other children. One neighbor even mentioned that Cheryl had expressed fear of her own mother. Despite the alleged negligence of her own children, later in the same year, Diane was finally accepted into a surrogate program. In May 1982, Diane gave birth to a girl named Jennifer and surrendered her to her parents in exchange for $10,000. In February of 1983, just a few months before the shooting incident, Diane returned to Springfield, Oregon, to be closer to her parents. Despite the relocation, she maintained her employment as a postal worker. Despite Diane's unstable life, nobody could have anticipated the tragedy that would engulf her family just months later. As the investigation into Diane's past unfolded, she seemed to develop a newfound interest in giving interviews. It was evident that Diane enjoyed being in the spotlight and the attention that came with it.
We were just out, sightseeing, you'd say. And the kids got tired. They fell asleep in the car, so I decided to just head on home. But I saw a road I hadn't been on before. We like to take back roads. And just went down that road. And there was a guy standing in the road, flagging me down, so I stopped.
Within a few days of the tragic incident, She eagerly gave multiple interviews appearing with full hair and makeup. She would retell her story over and over, emphasizing her pain while frequently downplaying her children's fate.
Danny's going to walk again. I don't care if we just have to will him to walk. I think he's going to walk. The doctors all say he won't. But I know that your mind controls your body, and if I can love him enough and encourage him enough, I believe he'll walk.
She made this claim even after knowing that the bullet had caused significant damage to his spine and posed a risk of permanent paralysis. Diane may have intended to elicit sympathy from the public through these interviews, but it just had the opposite effect. Instead of garnering support, her behavior and demeanor during the interview began to raise suspicion and doubt among viewers.
Everybody knew it, didn't ring true, pretty much a lie. Everything she was saying was a lie.
She could feel that the focus had changed from this bushy-haired stranger to her.
People noted instances where she appeared to laugh or make light of the gruesome details of that fateful night. These actions, along with the inconsistencies in her narrative, caused public opinion to shift, viewing Diane less as a grieving mother and more as a potential perpetrator. As Diane noticed the shift in public perception, she attempted to counter the growing suspicion by posting contrasting questions.
If I had shot my own children, would I not have done a good job of it? Why would I have taken my kids to the hospital? Wouldn't I have made sure they were dead and then cried crocodile tears? That's insane to think that I would do such a thing and then bring the witnesses in against myself. That's crazy.
What Diane didn't know was that there was one person who had witnessed the truth she had so desperately tried to cover up. Joseph Inman was behind Diane's car that night and saw something that completely contradicted Diane's story.
We found a witness, a gentleman who came up behind her. Diane was traveling so slow that this witness's speedometer wouldn't move off the peg. It's my belief that she was waiting for the kids to die.
Diane's story didn't make sense from the start. After all, what would a stranger have to gain by shooting the children? If he had wanted the car, he could have just shot her, the only adult present at the scene, and taken the car. Furthermore, the forensic evidence pointed towards a different scenario. Bloodstains were found on the side door of the front seat where Cheryl had been shot, and on the rear seat where Danny and Christine had been hit, but there was no blood on the driver's side. If Diane had been shot as she described, it would be expected for her to instinctively grab the wound with her other hand, resulting in blood being present on her hand and the steering wheel. Additionally, the location of the gunpowder residue indicated that the shooter was likely seated in the driver's seat, casting further doubt on Diane's account. However, there was one interview that Diane Downs would give in November 1983 that would send shockwaves throughout the nation. People couldn't believe the level of narcissism displayed during the interview with reporter Ann Yeager for KEZI News.
When this man shot my daughter, my first reaction was to snap back to my childhood, to the pain that had happened to me back then, my marriage, my entrapment by society. This man was bigger than me. He was stronger than me. He had more power because he had a gun. He was in control and I was not. And there was nothing I could do. And I stood there and I looked at Christy reaching, and the blood that just kept gushing out of her mouth. What do you do?
In a shocking audacity, she even stated that her kids were luckier than her and made jokes about it.
Everybody says you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months.
Needless to say, it was a surreal experience for the viewers as they witnessed firsthand the depths of Diane's self-centeredness and lack of empathy. The lack of trust and suspicion surrounding Diane Downs went far beyond the media and law enforcement. Diane's own father casted doubts on her account. It must have taken him an immense amount of courage to say this about his own daughter. But he too could not shake off the feeling that something didn't sit right.
Diane had been shot in the left arm, and she's right-handed, and I made the comment to the police department there that night. It looks to me like Diane did it because the children have been shot in the chest, and Diane has only been shot in the arm.
But the case against Diane Downs was still weak. All the evidence was circumstantial. The disturbing behavior exhibited by her and the inconsistencies in her story were not sufficient to directly establish her guilt in the crime. The case hinged on the other two witnesses, Christy and Danny. Unfortunately, Danny, being only 3 years old at the time of the attack, was too young to remember any significant information about the incident. This left Christy as the potential key witness. However, Christy's ability to communicate was severely impacted due to the stroke she suffered. Although there was hope, no one was sure if she would ever be able to speak normally. Yet every time her mother entered the room, Christy's eyes glazed over with apparent fear, and her heart rate significantly increased. In light of the overall circumstances and the need to ensure the safety and well-being of the children, the state made the decision to remove custody from Diane. It was determined that the children would be placed into foster care once they were released from the hospital. With each passing day, Diane became increasingly careless and overconfident in her demeanor. She even went as far as challenging the police to arrest her, as she firmly believed they did not have enough evidence to incriminate her.
Please arrest me so that I can prove I'm innocent so my kids can come home, and they wouldn't.
At the same time, the police were still grappling with the lack of a clear motive for the murder. The strongest forensic evidence they had was the 22 bullet shells discovered at the crime scene, but the absence of a murder weapon hindered their progress. Faced with limited leads, detectives decided to visit Diane's apartment in the hopes of finding any additional clues.
We went to Downs' apartment and conducted a search at the residence.
The first notable piece of evidence that the detectives found at Diane's home was a diary. It served as a treasure trove of information about Diane's life after she had moved to Chandler in 1982. While working as a postal carrier, Diane involved herself in multiple affairs with married coworkers. One of them, however, would alter the course of her life permanently. In July 1982, Diane Downs began an affair with Robert Knickerbocker, a fellow coworker who was married to a woman named Charlene. At the time, he was having problems with Charlene and was looking for a distraction. Diane never meant anything more than a fling to him, and he had no intention of leaving his wife. However, to Diane, he was her greatest love. In her diary, Diane mentioned how she never loved anybody more than she loved Nick, her affectionate nickname for him. She fantasized about building a life and starting a family with him. She was so interested in him that she rented an apartment and even got a tattoo of a large rose with his name beneath it. That was not the case with Nick. Throughout the 9 months of their affair, Nick's commitment wavered between Diane and his wife Charlene. In February of 1983, Diane's pursuit of Nick reached a breaking point. She began pressuring him to divorce his wife, and he finally confessed that he loved his wife, Charlene, more than he loved Diane. He also made it clear that he had no desire to have children, and he didn't intend to become the stepfather to her children either. In an attempt to manipulate the situation, Diane requested a transfer from Chandler to Springfield, Oregon, where her parents lived. She believed that this move would intimidate Nick and make him run back to her. She even asked her father, Wes, who also worked for the Postal Service, to help Nick find a job in Oregon. However, once Diane left Arizona, Nick gained clarity and realized that he didn't want to move to Springfield or be with Diane. He decided to stay with his wife and refused Diane's mail and calls, marking the definitive end of their relationship. Despite the end of the relationship in April of 1983, Diane's infatuation with Nick continued to consume her thoughts and writings. She expressed her longings for him, both physically and emotionally. Even after everything, she held on to the hope that he would eventually come back to her. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, her lingering feelings for Nick did not stop her from sleeping with other men, beginning just 7 days after her arrival in Springfield. When the police searched her home, they found that Diane had kept 2 of Nick's pictures with her own pictures on top of the television, but there were no pictures of the kids. The detectives made an observation that Diane seldom wrote about her children, Christy, Cheryl, and Danny, in her diary. The majority of her diary entries revolved around Nick. However, on May 11, 1983, just 8 days before the shootings, Diane's focus abruptly shifted. It was as if she had suddenly rediscovered her children and started describing them as fantastic, smart, and sweet. She portrayed her family as a tight-knit group, referring to themselves as the 4 Musketeers, and expressing a newfound love for them that supposedly surpassed her feelings for Nick. Investigators believe that at this point Diane had already made plans to kill him. It was not just another red flag. The detectives believed they had finally found the motive for the crime. According to them, Diane saw her children as thorns in her side.
He wasn't going to join her as long as she had the kids. The quickest, simplest way was to eliminate the children.
She believed that removing her children from the picture would make her become more appealing to Nick, and that he would then be willing to provide emotional support and comfort in the aftermath of the tragic event. It wasn't the only incriminating evidence police found at Diane's home. They also found a few unfired .22 caliber shell casings with extractor markings. When detectives asked Diane if she owned any .22 caliber firearms, she denied this vehemently. But both Steve Downs and Robert Knickerbocker confirmed that she did in fact own one such firearm. The detectives approached Nick and requested his assistance in obtaining a confession from Diane. By exploiting her weakness towards him, he agreed to cooperate and made a few calls to Diane.
Listen, what have you told the police about me?
Nothing.
Well, you must have told them something, because, I got to have an alibi for that night.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I do. They already told me.
They're bluffing. They're trying to pin this on me, and I didn't do it.
During the call, Diane primarily focused on her own experiences and emotions, particularly her physical pain and the need for emotional support.
How's everything?
Nothing changed.
That's good. Things have changed a lot for me.
Yeah, I can imagine so.
I have a steel plate in my arm. I'm glad you called. I need somebody to talk to. I was thinking about you real bad last night. Just needed somebody to talk to, I guess.
Yet she failed to express concern about the well-being of her surviving children. In one call, Nick told Diane that he didn't believe her story. Whether Robert Knickerbocker was worth murder to Diane Downs or not, she did not confess to the crime. At this point, detectives were no longer playing on the surface. They confronted her directly and made it clear that she was the primary focus of their investigation.
It was the time that we decided to take her on and seriously challenge her on the inconsistencies in her story.
Detectives are no longer being Mr. Nice Guy. They're playing hardball.
Diane, your story stinks. This whole thing is it stunk from the beginning.
I'm fine.
Realizing that sarcasm wouldn't save her, Diane changed her story. She claimed that there was no bushy-haired stranger, but instead it was two men wearing ski masks who attacked her and her children. According to Diane, the men knew her as they called her by name.
Talked to you, referred to you by name, and also referred to your tattoo.
Right.
As close as you can remember, what did he tell you?
If you say anything about what happened here, that they'd come back and kill me.
Throughout a 2-hour period, the detectives relentlessly probed her for the truth, and as they neared the conclusion, her frustration reached a boiling point.
I'll make you a deal, okay? Next time I remember something, yeah, you can find the guy yourself, because I know I didn't do it. And you can chase your little tails for the next 20,000 years if that's what it says. You don't like my help, you can get.
You're real confident in yourself, aren't you?
I know that I didn't do it.
Come on, Diane. It's your turn at bat.
Since you guys seem to think that I should have brought Diane with me, I will get her myself, because I know who did it.
You do know who did it.
Yes, I do. I damn sure do.
You know him by name?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
You saw him shoot your kid.
Yep.
Pretty important.
And I saw him grab my arm and yank my arm out and shoot my arm and say, now try to get away with it.
The tape ended with Diane storming out of the sheriff's office, unable to put up with the questions.
And I'm leaving because I know who did it. Bye.
The time is now 17:46, and Diane is just departed the office. We're concluding the tape.
A month passed after the shooting. The pressure was mounting on law enforcement to make an arrest. By the beginning of 1984, police had gathered all the evidence pointing towards the prime suspect, Diane. However, they eagerly awaited Christie's recovery, as she was the only person who could provide them with a first-hand account of what truly transpired.
Christy would be a key witness in this trial, but she needed to be healthy enough physically and emotionally to be able to take the stand.
Christy's healing process was slow but steady, and she eventually regained her ability to speak. Despite her initial fear, with the help of therapists working tirelessly with her for months, Christy mustered the courage to eventually reveal the truth. It was a truth that would put an end to all the speculations surrounding the case. Confirming what many had already suspected, Christy unequivocally declared that her own mother, Diane Downs, was the one who shot her and her siblings on that fateful night. On February 28, 1984, nearly 9 months after the shooting, Diane was finally arrested.
She's been charged with 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of assault in the first degree.
Diane pleaded not guilty to all charges, and thus the case proceeded to trial. However, Diane Downs was not one to go down so easily. When her trial commenced in June 1984, she shocked the nation by appearing visibly pregnant, leaving everyone speechless. As it turned out, back in October of 1983, while working as a postal carrier, Diane seduced a young teacher and ended up becoming pregnant. Diane said she felt lonely without her children.
I got pregnant because I miss Christy and I miss Danny and I miss Cheryl so much. I'm never going to see Cheryl on earth again. And you can't replace children, but you can replace the effect that they give you. And they give me love, they give me satisfaction, they give me stability, they give me a reason to live and a reason to be happy, and that's gone. They took it from me. But children are so easy to conceive.
The prosecution, however, saw it as Diane's way of gaining sympathy. The trial of Diane Downs became a national spectacle, with hundreds of people lining up each day in hopes of securing a seat in the courtroom. Though cameras were not allowed inside the courtroom, the media closely followed the trial. The jury was comprised of 9 women and 3 men. The trial lasted a month. The prosecutor, Fred Hughey, had a solid case against Diane. The evidence against Diane appeared insurmountable. Along with the bullet casings and blood spatter, Hughey called upon a number of witnesses, including Heather Plord, Joseph Inman, Stephen Downs, and Robert Knickerbocker. They all testified against Diane. Defense attorney Jim Jagger made every effort to present Diane Downs' version of events, emphasizing the involvement of a bushy-haired stranger. Diane herself took the stand and reiterated her story, staunchly maintaining her innocence. However, she struggled to provide a convincing explanation for the inconsistencies in her account. Diane also testified that she had been physically abused by her father on multiple occasions, which impacted her future decisions, a disturbing claim that Diane's family denied. The jury viewed this claim as a lie intended to invoke sympathy, and Diane's family denied the allegations as well. The most anticipated witness of this trial was Christine Downs. With utmost bravery, then 9-year-old Christy, still suffering with a speech impediment, took the stand to recount the night of May 19, 1983.
Who shot you?
My mom.
Christy's recollection of the events on May 19, 1983 was vivid and haunting. She remembered the moments leading up to the shooting, including visiting Heather Ploward. Christy and Danny occupied the back seat, while Cheryl sat in the front passenger seat. Christy recalled that after a few moments into the ride, the car was pulled over to the side of the road, and her mother, Diane, exited the vehicle. She saw her mother going to the back of the car and retrieved something from the trunk. Diane then returned to the car, leaned across the front seat, and shot Cheryl, who was in the front passenger seat. Afterward, Diane leaned over the back seat and shot Danny. Christy also remembered that she was also shot by her mother, as she witnessed in horror. She began sobbing, describing the gruesome details of that night. In a heartbreaking response to Hughey's final question about her feelings for her mother, Christy expressed that she still loved her. Her testimony sealed her mother's fate. On June 17, 1984, Diane Downs was found guilty on all counts by the jury. Her sentencing was scheduled for the following month, However, just 10 days after the verdict, Diane gave birth to her third daughter, whom she named Amy Elizabeth. The child was immediately taken into custody by the state of Oregon, establishing that Diane could not have been more wrong in her prediction.
We're going to take away this one. I don't know how they're going to do it. What if I'd like to see them try to take this baby from me, and how?
The girl was later adopted by Chris and Jackie Babcock, who chose to rename her Rebecca Babcock. On August 28, 1984, Judge Gregory Foote sentenced Diane Downs to life imprisonment, plus an additional 50 years to be served consecutively. After their mother's conviction, Christy and Danny remained in the care of their foster family for a brief period, before Fred Hughey, the prosecutor in their mother's case, and his wife, Joanne, stepped forward to adopt them. Recognizing his own limitations and the challenges posed by raising two children with physical and emotional trauma, Steve Downs made the difficult decision to step aside as their father. The saga of Diane Downs was expected to be confined within the walls of the prison, but she was determined not to serve her time quietly. Diane continued to give interviews to whomever wanted to talk to her, while still stressing her innocence.
I can sit here with a clear conscience and know that I did not shoot my kids.
On July 11, 1987, a highly unexpected event unfolded when Diane Downs managed to escape from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center in Salem.
I recognize it to be a shirt belonging to Diane Downs.
Convicted murderer Diane Downs left behind her ripped blouse, evidence of her struggle to break out of the maximum security facility.
She accomplished this daring feat by scaling an 18-foot razor wire fence, cleverly disguising herself with multiple layers of clothing.
At that location, the perimeter fence is not alarmed, is alarmed, but the interior fence is not. I would not consider it an effective deterrent, and that's essentially how she got out. She went up and over the single perimeter fence.
This triggered one of the most extensive manhunts ever conducted in the state of Oregon.
Downs was dropped off at this family restaurant about 1 mile from the correctional facility. Police believe she then traveled on foot into town.
Reports of Diane sightings flooded in from all over Oregon and the Northwest as the public remained vigilant. It would take 10 days before she was eventually located, during which time she could have potentially fled across the country to any unknown destination. Astonishingly, she had been hiding less than half a mile away from the prison, living with another married man, the husband of a fellow inmate. Ironically, Diane would later claim she escaped to find the bushy-haired stranger.
I wanted revenge at that time. I wanted to do some really obscene things to his body.
Diane received an additional 5-year sentence for the escape. Best-selling crime author Ann Rule penned the book Small Sacrifices in 1987, providing a detailed account of Diane Downs' life and her murder trial. The book gained significant attention and interest from readers. In 1989, a made-for-TV movie, also titled Small Sacrifices, was produced based on Ann Rule's book. The movie starred Farrah Fawcett, who portrayed Diane Downs, and it was broadcasted on ABC, further capturing public interest in the case.
He shot my kids. He shot them over and over. And I keep hearing the gun. Then he shot me.
In 1998, Ann Rule and Diane Downs made an appearance on The Oprah Winfrey Show, during which Diane directed criticism and taunts towards Ann for how she portrayed her life in the book.
The Diane Downs story. Have you read that book?
Yes, I have.
And what do you think?
I take issue with much of it.
Okay. What do you take issue with?
Well, she considers it a true story, and she's quoted me all through the book and tells the reader how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking at various times all through the book, yet she's never interviewed me. How does she do that? How does she justify that being a true story?
In 1989, Diane wrote a book titled Best Kept Secrets, in which she provided her own account of the shooting. In classic Diane Downs fashion, she portrayed herself as a victim of the state of Oregon. In the mid-2000s, Rebecca Babcock, the youngest daughter of Diane Downs, reached out to her birth mother. Throughout most of her life, Rebecca had kept her distance from the tragic reality of her birth. However, in 2005, after placing her own baby up for adoption, she started to empathize with her mother. Rebecca wondered if Diane had also experienced a similar sense of emptiness when she gave her away.
I thought about,
Diane, and that was the one and only time I have ever had compassion for that woman.
With uncertainty in her heart, Rebecca wrote a letter to Diane and attached a few pictures of herself.
I don't know if you're going to believe me. You probably won't, but I believe that I may possibly be your biological daughter.
Diane immediately wrote back.
You look like me, same chin. Don't you hate it?
However, with each subsequent letter, the content became increasingly unsettling. So much so that Rebecca requested Diane to stop writing back, as she now saw her as a monster. The feelings were mutual as it seemed. Diane went on to deny that Rebecca was even her daughter.
What was I thinking? Why in the world did I contact this woman?
Diane Downs made 3 attempts for parole. The first was in 2008, followed by another in 2010, and the most recent one in 2020. However, she was denied parole on all occasions. The parole board cited her failure to admit guilt and the lack of perceived remorse as factors contributing to the denials.
All I know is that I did not murder my children, and 1 year after my uncle was murdered, my children and I were attacked for no reason at all.
That you did not commit these murders? Or the murder and the other crimes you were convicted of?
Absolutely. I didn't commit them, and I still maintain my innocence.
Despite a horrid start in life, both Christy and Danny had moved on in their lives. With the Hugies, they found the nurturing and supportive environment they had never experienced with Diane. The shooting incident caused Christy to have a lifelong speech impediment, while Danny continues to live with partial paralysis due to the bullet in his back. But these challenges did not stop them from living life to the fullest. Both Christy and Danny pursued higher education and successfully graduated college. Christy eventually got married and became a mother to a baby boy and a baby girl, whom she named Cheryl in honor of her late sister. On the other hand, Danny has excelled in the field of computers and works in the computer industry. They prefer to maintain a private life and have chosen to sever all contact with Diane or anyone related to her. As we come to the conclusion of this mind-boggling story, the events of that fateful night still leave us pondering what truly unfolded. Do you find Diane's story credible, or do you think that it is nothing but a bunch of lies? Let us know your opinion. We'd love to hear from you. If you would like us to cover a case, please drop your recommendation in the comments section. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping true stories like this.